What's going on, guys? It's your boy Ray. I am here solo today. This video might come out on my personal channel. It might come out on the podcast feed, and that's going to depend on how I feel about it at the end. This video began as a rant that I made in my car that expanded into a full video rather than me just put it out as a little clip or something. So rather than me just talk out of my ass, I'll give you a little bit more. We'll lay out some of the details. I'll elaborate a little bit more on why I feel the way that I do. I've also taken some time to sit with the occurrences, but I will start with the thesis. The Kroenkes are on watch. I'm not sentencing them to banishment for being cheap bastards, but they are on watch for being cheap bastards. That's my personal view of this situation, just based on what's happening and what has happened and what I expect, what has become a possibility is what I'll say and how I'll put it. So to get into what has happened for the Nuggets this past week is over the deadline. Not a lot of meaningful movement. I think a lot of what is important right now for the team happened last summer in terms of trading Michael Porter and that 2032 first for Cam Johnson saves the team 20-some million dollars, gets them very close to the luxury tax threshold, right? Gives them that I'm going to use the word flexibility, but I think that term is a bit loaded right now, or at the very least, I think it means different things to different people, because when I think people use the word flexibility, some of us think of flexibility in basketball terms. Like, okay, now they have the flexibility to be a better basketball team, right? Is to be a more whole, more complete team in a way that they didn't have the ability to do before. However, when we talk about flexibility, I think from an ownership perspective, it's and some of the ways in which we are hearing the team speak to the public, flexibility to them means the ability maybe to become a better basketball team, but also the flexibility to save a lot of money. That has become a real option. I've made a video before about I don't think whether you like the Michael Porter trade or don't or not. I'm someone who thinks that it was not a great deal for Denver. You can justify it in a few different ways. You can say, well, they saved all this money and now they have that flexibility. Again, back to that term, they can use it to become a better basketball team. I don't know if that's accurate, because here's one of the issues. I think that conversation often follows with, well, now they have Valanciunas and Bruce Brown and Tim Hardaway Jr. They're such a deep basketball team, and Cam Johnson is like just as good as, I think that's how it was framed. That you're not losing much or much of anything really going from Michael Porter to Cam Johnson on top of those things. You can say that. However, I want to point out some issues with that argument. The first thing I would say is when we make that calculus in the trade, Tim Hardaway Jr., Bruce Brown, I think everybody can agree that we're glad to have them here in Denver. Tim's having a great year, and Bruce, I think, is having a better last week and a half, 2 weeks now. Um, and even if he wasn't, we love Bruce anyway, right? Just from a team emotional morale perspective, I think it's great to have a culture so potent that you have players that love the city and love the team and are willing and eager to come back just to be here because they want to be. That said, they're minimum contracts. Those are not contracts that you need to dump salary to give out. And that's gonna I'm gonna come back to that difference a bit later when we talk about some of the implications of the salary cap and the luxury tax and the first apron and the second apron and that sort of thing. Um, Tim Hardaway Jr., Bruce Brown, not minimum contracts. They're not something, as much as I'm glad to have them here, they're not part of the calculus that I make when I measure the value that Denver is getting out of having, I don't want to say dumped Michael Porter Jr., salary dumped him, but I don't know what else you want to call that. I mean, you can call it what you want, argue with your mama, et cetera, et cetera. But now you're close to the luxury tax and you're going into this trade deadline. So it was a simple matter of finding someone to take on Hunter Tyson's contract. As it so happens, we traded a future second round pick for probably a worse second round pick from a draft position wise, but a better second round pick from a timing wise, going from 2032 to 2026. What Denver is going to do with that pick, I'm not really sure. Draft picks in the second round at the back of the draft, if you're going to trade them, they're not worth much. You're talking about 50, 55, maybe it's the high 40s, but it's probably so deep in the second round that they're functionally not worth anything. Um, that's been true for a long time. It was true in the Reggie Jackson situation. Denver traded 3 second round picks to offload Reggie Jackson's contract. And I think that's the risk that you run when you're chasing mid-level exception players, particularly when you're the Denver Nuggets, only because Denver is just isn't hasn't and I don't think is ever going to be a premier free agent destination for players who are looking for, if you're looking for like a culture of, from a city perspective, not the team, but if you're looking for um, like a nightlife, Denver's probably not for you. If you're looking for premium like art, history, culture, Denver has a really strong art scene, low key. But if you're looking for like music performers, Denver is not a city that every performing artist comes through. It people come through here all the time, but it's not in Atlanta, it's not a Los Angeles, it's not a Miami, it's not a New York, it's not one of those glamour markets. I'll put it that way. Um, a lot of people don't like players, I should say. A lot of players don't like Denver, like functionally. I know a lot of people are Denver Nuggets fans and don't necessarily live in Denver. Denver has a, I'm gonna get to the glasses in a bit. Denver has an airport that is very far from downtown, very far from the arena. Flying in and out of Denver, going to and from downtown, it's a pain for all of us. It's a pain for me. I don't do it. I take the train. I live in a place specifically so that I can hop on my train and yeah, it takes like an hour, but at least it's less stressful than driving over there. That I can take the train downtown and then take the downtown train out to the airport. But if you are driving or if you even are renting a car or what have you, that Pena Boulevard traffic, man, is not a good look. It's not a good look if you're trying to get somewhere. It's not a good look if it's at any busy time of day at all. That isn't the middle of the night. Traffic out to the airport is terrible. Um, Denver doesn't have a lot of amenities. There are a lot of stories about guys. Um, Parking is a challenge, around Ball Arena. I also go to CU Denver, so I know. On a regular basis, it is always a challenge parking around Ball Arena. And if you don't have your own designated parking spot, if you're not important enough in the organization, which some players have not been important enough to have their own spot and parked in the wrong place, gotten in a lot of trouble. Sometimes they've got to do things like clear their own snow off their own car, et cetera, et cetera. Players complain all the time about the facilities themselves and how Denver doesn't really have great practice facilities within the arena. Um, do they have elite medical support staff, infrastructure type of things as well? I can't say that it doesn't seem like they do. And it seems like something that a lot of players notice once they are here, and either when they go somewhere else or when they come from somewhere else to come here. It's something they point out, maybe not loudly, because you don't want to. I think nobody wants to lampoon their own organization, the guy that they work for, and say, you're cheap bastards. But it is very common that Denver, obviously, they go to training camp other places. They go, the players that come here, they build their own facilities because it's worth it. It's worth that much to them. Aaron Gordon has his own facility at his place. Paul Millsap, when he was here, even though he's a free agent, he has his own facility in Atlanta that he took the players to over the summer. And I think that all those things kind of add up. It's not the most diverse place. It's the NBA. These are NBA players. What do you want to do? All that adds up to, I think this is just my opinion now, getting away from stating facts and what things are. Denver is never going to be a place where you can reliably say, we can go to the free agent market and we're going to hit on free agents. You got to think about the track. I mean, Denver has had a long track record of, even when we hit on guys, we pay that much more for them. Like, even when we get the right guy, we're not sometimes even retaining our own players. When they hit free agency, we've got to pay an extra bit more than what they might get somewhere else for, I think, all of these reasons coming together. I think that's historically been true. And it's hard for me to, sometimes we get a deal, right? Sometimes we get a Bruce Brown, sometimes we get a Tim Hardaway Jr. and it works out and we're super happy about it. But plenty of other times we get a Dario Saric, plenty of other times you get a Reggie Jackson. Plenty of other times, maybe you get the guy, or you retain Mason Plumlee. You bring in Paul Millsap. You get other guys around the league, but you got to pay $17 million for Mason Plumlee. You got to pay $33, million a year for Paul Millsap in his semi-washed out era. So I have that concern. And as I go into what I'm about to say is, so Denver has a lot of flexibility now, right? I'm going to share this with you. So if you weren't looking at my face, I might not even make my face the main camera. I might put up me bowling or something. I don't know. If that's something that excites you, you let me know. But before I talk about the flexibility, I do want to talk a little bit about, so what is the limitations that they might be running up against in terms of the salary cap and the luxury tax and the first apron and the second apron. So right now, where Denver is, they're right below the luxury tax. However, they've been above the luxury tax for the last few years. And so they have 1 year down at this point. They'll need another year being below the luxury tax to then, in that next year, go above it and not be hit with the repeater tax. What does that mean? Frankly, not a lot from a basketball perspective. Actually, nothing. It doesn't mean anything from a basketball perspective. It's purely a financial penalty, right? It can be expensive. Don't get me wrong, it can be expensive. And if you want a pocket watch for the Kroenkes and be like, yeah, guys, this is really hard for them. Owning a billion-dollar franchise, that's so hard. It's so expensive. You can. It is. You look at some numbers versus other numbers, and you're like, yeah, that luxury tax penalty is relatively large. However, at the same time, in my view, again, getting back into opinion, the value, just the raw valuation of the Denver Nuggets eclipses the growth in valuation eclipses anything they might pay, especially considering what we're talking about paying for, which is championships, which is long playoff series, which is decades and eras worth of merch and lore and Nikola Jokic. There's no way that Nikola Jokic is not making up whatever the luxury tax is worth on the back end for the Kroenkes. That's just my opinion. However, the aprons are a little bit different. Going into the first apron, you start to lose some flexibility, right? You don't get the biannual exception. You can't sign players on the buyout market if their salary was above the non-taxpayer mid-level exception. So for a good example of that would be, say, Denver's really short on forwards right now. DeMar DeRozan, my guy. That is my guy. I like DeMar DeRozan. I've always liked his game. I think he's in a position where being like an off the bench scorer makes a lot of sense for him. If he got bought out, Denver last year could not have signed him because they were above the first apron. This year they could because they're below it, right? That's one of the things you lose. You don't get you can't use the taxpayer mid-level if it's going to push you above the first apron. You can't aggregate salaries into something for someone big. That makes sense. So you couldn't combine Zeke Naji and Cam Johnson and go get a $30 million player if you're above the first apron. And you can't trade certain far out draft picks, right? The second apron is a little bit more of the same kind of things, right? If you traded a player away, you can only take minimums back. So basically, your only path towards decompressing your roster financially is letting guys walk from a functional perspective. You still can't aggregate. You don't get exceptions. Now, there's a clip running around that said we can't make trades. That's not the case. It's not that you can't make trades. You just can't turn a $44 million player into a $20 million player like Denver just did above the second apron. Now, you can't take, there's a lot of, so all that is to say, there's a lot of restrictions. I'm trying to include as many facts and reasonings as I can here. Again, getting back to my opinion, if you are comfortable with your guys, you're not really doing much of this anyway, if that makes sense. If you get to a point where we have our guys, this is our era, we're willing to keep them for the next short to medium term, none of this really stops you from doing any of the things. You might get your first round pick pushed to the end of the first round 7 years from now, something like that. So if you have a Jokic and a Murray and a Porter and you've drafted a bunch of guys, that's pretty much your path to replacing. You can get minimum contract guys like Tim Hardaway Jr. and Bruce Brown, or you can draft guys and you have those guys birthright. So you can go above the salary aprons to re-sign those guys and no one's going to stop you. And just to be clear, it's the same mechanism, bird rights, I mean, that they used to bring Aaron Gordon back. So that's 125% of your previous salary. That is so that is how they were able to retain Aaron and give him the deal that he wants while still not breaking any rules, basically, I guess is all I can really say about that. So talking about the luxury tax that Denver, to bring it back in, talking about the luxury tax that Denver just ducked under. Congratulations. The Kroenkes saved a lot of money. That's what they accomplished. And if they engage in some careful maneuvering, they can continue to save a lot of money. So that careful maneuvering is being very thoughtful about how they convert Spencer Jones. Depending on what he gets, Denver may be able to bring a guy in off the buyout market. Maybe even two minimums, or maybe Spencer on the minimum and buyout player on the minimum, if that's how it goes. But that depends on what they agree, the dollar amount that Spencer agrees to. So that's also a big factor here. If Denver does give Spencer more than the minimum, to a certain extent, it might mean that Denver then also has to wait until the prorated for chunk of the minimum can be given to a buyout guy. I don't know if that's going to hold them back much, but that is going to be a thing. So it might take them a bit to bring someone in off the buyout market. That also means that Denver spent a couple days without Spencer Jones, which is kind of lame, especially when they're shorthanded, especially when it feels like that shorthandedness is putting pressures on the players that are playing in a way that I don't think is necessarily, again, going back to opinion, is necessarily great for their health. However, the big issue that I think will come is, what do they do next year? And this is where I'm at in terms of, they're not arrest these men guilty, send them to prison for being cheap bastards. It's more that they're on watch for doing so, because now that they've saved a good chunk of money, sure, on the luxury tax this year, what Denver does next, if they go above the luxury tax, which going on this chart, so it went from 171 to 188 million. That's a pretty meaningful jump. Something like $16 million, $17 million. Where Denver is right now financially, just in terms of the commitments they've already made. So assuming Valanciunas is back, Zeke is here, Christian is here, Cam is here, they let Peyton Watson walk, Deron Holmes is here, Julian Strawther, Jalen Pickett, that's pretty much the roster that they have financial commitments to already. That means letting Peyton walk, letting Bruce walk, letting Tim walk, and letting Spencer Jones walk, I believe. They would still need to trim 20, 25 million, somewhere around that range financially, depending on how it pans out with the league. So that means they would need to do something like salary dump Cam Johnson or salary dump Christian Brown. just to get under the luxury tax, assuming they sign no one else. So they're probably gonna have to do a little bit more. They're probably gonna have to move off of like, can you salary dump Zeke Naji too, and let Peyton walk, and let Bruce walk, and let Tim walk, and this is a long list. If they do all those things, I gotta say, and I think a lot of people will agree, guilty. You are cheap bastards because look, you can say, well, it's a lot of money and think about the financials of and running a business is hard. You can also, again, make the argument that they are making a lot of money off this era and they have a long future ahead of them to save money and bring in luxury tax payments, because when you're under the luxury tax, all those taxes get spread around to the rest of the league, to the teams that are under it. So also, hooray for them. However, if they go right back to being expensive, they're hitting the repeater tax, which again is um, not relevant to basketball. There are no basketball related restrictions to any of that, guys. So what can they do from here? I think is obviously we discussed the possibility that they are cheap bastards and are going to let a bunch of guys walk and or salary dump a few people as well, just to get under the luxury tax to avoid the repeater, and then argue that they can go in later, which I've already I don't like it. I think that's a ridiculous idea, particularly because here's the issue: is you're not going to have that much to spend the money on at that point. And I think a number of other teams are coming into this era of their stars tenure, looking at Golden State, looking at teams like the Milwaukee Bucks, where you might, okay, be willing to spend money, but unless you have the guys to spend money on, it doesn't actually make that much sense. So, kind of going back to the salary table a little bit here, in the future, Denver has a few options. I mean, they're committed to about 215 right now. I doubt, say they just stood pat, let Peyton walk, let Bruce, Tim walk, and fill the back of the end of the roster with like second round picks, like a Spencer Jones conversion and a couple other guys. They're probably around where the second apron. This is just me guessing. To be fair, the current threshold is for the luxury tax is 208. Just to be clear, 208 this year. So I can only assume next year it might go up like $5-7 million conservatively, and I try to make conservative estimates. So let's assume they are around the second apron. And honestly, they'll probably be over it. And what again, we went through all the things that's going to mean. They're not going to be able to make a lot of trades. They're not going to be able to get some like mid-level exception free agents. And so you're kind of going to be stuck with the guys you have, even if especially if you extend Peyton and he's up at 20, 25, $30 million a year. Well, what does that mean? You can do it because you have his bird rights. Again, you have his bird rights. You can do that. You can extend Peyton. You could extend Jonas in theory. In theory, I believe the same is true of Cam. So you could commit to your guys. That is an option. Let's maybe explore that mentally real quick. They just commit to their guys. That's kind of the era. That's my opinion. Is you're kind of looking at who the Nuggets are going to be for the Jokic era. If anything, you're thinking about who's going to be the next Tim Hardaway, the next Bruce Brown, the next Spencer Jones, the next Peyton Watt, some of the next like draft picks who can come along and contribute. But outside of that, Denver will be pretty much locked into the guys they have. Now, Jonas being 33, I don't know if that's something they want to do yet long term without another solution at backup center. That being said, is there a path where, say, they go into the second apron a year from now for 26, 27, and then kind of back out of it? And I think that's possible if they extend Peyton, which I think I have advocated for, and a lot of people have advocated for. I don't know what happens with Bruce or Tim, but if it's not Bruce, if it's not Tim, one of them's going to be Spencer. Um, and you bring in another minimum guy, and you're probably over the second apron, but you do get $23 million, $10 million off the books, which kind of offsets what I would guess Peyton would get as well. And you're in a position where maybe you can move on from a Zeke Naji who has a player option. So as much as, I don't think here's what I'll say. If you can integrate Zeke into the rotation, his deal's not that bad. The issue is just that you failed to integrate Zeke into the rotation for like another 3-4 years. Um, we've talked about that a lot. I don't think he's a backup center. He's not a center. He's too small. He works hard, and that can be a rebounding offensively, a rebounding boon, but he's too small to play center, so I don't think he's a part of the conversation, even when we're talking about replacing Jonas Valanciunas. Deron Holmes, kind of a similar deal. I'm not saying he can't play center. He certainly has the skill set in a way that Zeke does not. Zeke is very much a guy who should be staying out of the way and taking spot up shots and maybe some dunker, dump off type, go at the rim type of plays. But he's not a guy you should be running post touches for or playing through in a significant way. But I think Duran has some of that in him. He has some touch. He can shoot. He can flex. He can be around some other big bodies, and it's not going to be an issue spacing wise. Anyway, he can move his feet pretty well. But again, he's a long ways away, in my opinion, in the weight room to even be in the conversation for playing backup center. So I don't know what they do there. However, you could go into the second apron, all that is to say, and then maybe you let Cam walk, or you let and you let Jonas walk, and you let that money come off the books and hope that whatever the bump up of the second apron is going to be in 27, 28 gives you enough space where you can duck under it, and then you can kind of address the issue at backup center, which I think is the big hole. There is becomes, when you get into that space, I think we're going to have a conversation about Aaron Gordon, because this was okay when it was Paul Millsap. Where Denver was in their process, it was okay that you're paying Paul Millsap in his 31, 32, 33-year seasons, $30+ million a year to kind of be the fourth, to transition from one of the best players on the team to being like the third best player on the team to being the fourth best player on the team to be, maybe he shouldn't be a starter. Not because he can't play, but because the physical burden is just a lot for him at that age and at his size, and that he's a lot more functional. And I think this will be true of Aaron as well. Not being a starter, not having the starter burden, not being the guy that Denver relies upon to say, we need you for at least like 65 games a year. Because I just don't know if that's going to be true for Aaron over time. You still love the shooting. You love the on-ball creation, and I'd love to see him stay in Denver for the rest of his career. But that $36 million a year might be the spot where you say, is that a guy we can move and create? Look, this is what we did with Michael Porter. I'm not saying you couldn't trade him. I'm just mad about what you got. and what you gave up to get it. If you had traded Michael Porter for Cam straight up, I'd probably be okay with it because you get salary relief, even though Michael Porter's a way better player than Cam. No disrespect to Cam. It's just that you shouldn't have to. The issue to tie back in is what we're talking about going forward into these years is sustainability, right? And if you want to contend and you want to keep being competitive, every time you make one of these moves, it can't be, well, we gave up our best draft asset to do it. Oh, well, yeah, we traded Michael Porter for Cam Johnson, and Cam really hasn't been as healthy as Mike and, hasn't been as productive. If you you need to get stuff, I guess is what I'm trying to say. You need to not be giving up assets to move on from these players. That's how you stay sustainable. And that might be something you have to do with Aaron. That might be something you do with Christian. 21, 23, 25. That's not a huge cap hit. Christian is a good player. You might not like all the things sometimes he's reluctant to shoot. Sometimes he's not the quickest guy. Sometimes he's not a physical force in the way that some of the more, I don't want to, again, people hate on me for saying he's not one of the best athletes in the game. There are more physically dominant players in the game. There are guys who are faster. There are guys who are stronger. There are guys who are just more of a snuffing presence defensively. But he's a good defender. He's persistent. He's thoughtful. He's always trying to work his hardest to contribute. And he shot 39% from three last year in the regular season. So that gives me some optimism that his trend as a three-point shooter in the playoffs, that can trend up a little bit as well. All he has to do, again, talking about sustainability and not being a negative asset, I think he'd definitely be somebody you can move and get draft capital or assets, positive value for if he can shoot 36% in the playoffs. Nothing crazy, 35, 36%. Not asking for 40. I'm just asking for like a league average, good, solid 3-point percentage in the playoffs. And I think he's a positive player. I think Peyton as well, depending on the number, but I feel pretty confident that he's also somebody that if you gave a similar contract to, yes, it's long, but we're also talking about Christian and Peyton's primes as athletes going into their primes as skilled players. Usually your athletic prime is like 22, 23, 24, but you kind of peak and blend that you might lose a little bit athletically, but your skill set really starts to polish up in that 26, 27, 28 period. So I'm not mad about the length of that contract, and I wouldn't be mad about the length of a Peyton Watson extension, and I don't think that would be problematic to move, especially when you look not at the total number, which is big, but at the individual cap hit, which is not as serious. Zeke, you're getting towards that point where if you couldn't move off of him in 26, 27, definitely 27, 28, he's an expiring. So Julian hasn't really found a place in the league, I think. Most of his numbers are awful. Can you get him cheap? Maybe Julian is a guy that can step into the Tim Hardaway Jr. role in the future and not feel like it's such an overwhelming thing for him, especially if he has a healthier offseason. He goes and hits the gym, comes back a little bit stronger. I like Jalen Pickett as a backup point guard. I get that a lot of people don't. A lot of people hate him, but I think he is a solid, sound player that thinks the game, that hustles defensively, that boxes out, which is a problem Denver continues to struggle with, is boxing out for some reason. Sometimes his shot is on, sometimes it's not. I think that's a confidence issue for him. If Julian's issue is in the weight room, Pickett's issue is ego, in that he doesn't have enough of it. If you're just asking me, he needs to be a more confident player to achieve and have that, because he has the skills, but you need to be confident if you're going to take step back threes. If you're just going to make any threes. And if you're his size, you need to make threes. And so I think that is kind of the path forward for Denver. If you're asking me, that's my pick. I think they go into the second apron in 26, 27, but not in a way that makes any like no extensions for Cam or Jonas. Sorry. I think you keep them, but you don't extend them. You let them come off the books, let that offset the extension you should give Peyton Watson, and you kind of work around that, and maybe consider an Aaron Gordon trade down the line in pursuance of a backup center and a little more of that, what I would say is good flexibility when it comes to staying under the second apron and not cheapo save our owners money flexibility in terms of ducking the luxury tax. If there's one thing I'm going to leave you with, the luxury tax has nothing to do with basketball. Nothing to do with basketball. They make plenty of money. They have plenty of money. They will make plenty of money, and they will have plenty of time to receive luxury tax stipends after Jokic is retired. Plenty of time. So let's get it done. Thanks for listening, guys. We appreciate it if you made it this far. And I have a proposition for you. But you can find me online at Ravon Hackshaw at X, on Twitter, on Instagram as well. You can find Peter at Bucketsins88, the show at Nuggets Wave. And yeah, give us a follow on Discord. If you'd like to engage with us in more thoughtful discussion, you can definitely do that there and kind of join the community, as well as be a part of a Family Feud Nugget style that I have planned, where based on polling that I take from the community at large, which I'm hoping you're willing to be a part of, I will turn it into a game, invite people on, and have them answer said questions based on the answers they give and how closely they can get to the truth per the community. They will get more or less points. That's the idea I have. So hopefully, as we kind of build up, I'll get a good roster of questioners and people willing to participate if you're interested in that. So definitely find us on Discord. I will have links to all those things down in the description and or the comments. And yeah, you can find us online at YouTube as well as on audio platforms. So little flexibility there. And yep, have a great day. I'll see you next time.